This is the 4.26 Uiryeong Memorial Park, built to remember the 56 people who lost their lives on April 26, 1982. A police officer was found responsible for the mass shooting that devastated this region. His name was Woo Bum-gon. Armed with rifles, grenades, and more than 100 rounds of ammunition taken from his own station, he moved from village to village through the night, entering homes and firing at anyone he encountered. By dawn, dozens were dead and many more were injured. For decades, the full truth remained hidden. Under the Chun Du-hwan regime, coverage of the massacre was tightly controlled. The public never learned how severely the police response had failed, and no memorial, public or private, was allowed to be held. The tragedy was left in silence, and the memories of that night survived only through those who lived it. Only in recent years did this monument appear, finally acknowledging a tragedy that had been suppressed for far too long. To understand why this place exists and how one officer was able to move freely through several villages without being stopped, we need to return to 1982, to the night when the first gunshot echoed across Uiryeong, and everything that followed unfolded in a matter of hours.
Hello, and welcome back to Dark Crimes Real.
In 1982, Uiryeong County in South Gyeongsang Province was a collection of small farming villages separated by short stretches of road and low wooded hills. Torongri, Ungyevri, and Pyeongchonri were among the communities linked by narrow paths and single-story homes, where families worked the fields during the day and gathered indoors soon after sunset. The region had limited communication infrastructure. Most households did not have individual telephone lines, and many relied on the local post office or the small switchboard operated by a few workers. When calls needed to be made outside the village, they often passed through that exchange. Emergency contact systems were minimal, and information rarely moved quickly between villages at night. At the time, South Korea was under the Chun Du-hwan military regime. Media coverage was controlled, and rural police stations operated with small teams and modest resources. The Gungyu substation, the station responsible for these villages, had only a handful of officers on rotation, with patrols that depended heavily on who was available that evening. Weapons for the reserve force were stored inside the station, but the procedures surrounding their access were not as strictly enforced as they should have been. As night fell on April 26th, most families were gathered together after a long day of work. The quiet of the area was shattered by a gunshot that rang out in the middle of the night. Woo Beom-gon was born in 1955 in Choryangdong, Busan. He was the third of four brothers, and his father was a police officer. His childhood was relatively happy, and under his father's influence, he also once aspired to become a police officer. However, after entering middle school, he became withdrawn and lost interest in studying. By the time he graduated from high school, he ranked near the bottom of his class. Just before his graduation, his father fell seriously ill and died of colorectal cancer. Woo was devastated, and his academic performance declined even further. As a reaction, he became aggressive and violent. Woo enrolled in college soon afterward, but did not complete his studies and failed to obtain a degree. Military service is mandatory in South Korea, and it was during this period that Woo enlisted and served in the Republic of Korea Marine Corps, where he discovered a particular talent for marksmanship. Military records describe him as physically capable and highly skilled with firearms. He completed training without any major violations, but fellow servicemen said he drank heavily off-duty and became easily agitated when questioned. The military environment emphasized strict discipline, but it also intensified Woo's sensitivity to criticism and his tendency to react strongly whenever he felt insulted. After leaving the military, Woo followed in his father's footsteps and joined the police force. His early years in the department were unremarkable. He completed assignments, followed orders, and moved through several small units without drawing special attention. However, in April 1981, Woo was assigned to one of the most elite units in the country, the security team responsible for protecting the Blue House, the presidential residence in Seoul. For Woo, this was the peak of his career, a position reserved for those considered reliable and disciplined. But the promotion did not last. Within months, his behavior deteriorated noticeably. Colleagues reported repeated incidents involving alcohol and angry outbursts. Supervisors documented disciplinary and attitude issues, and he was deemed unfit for the job. By the end of the year, Woo was removed from the Blue House unit and reassigned to the Gungyu Police Substation in Uiryeong County, a small rural post far from the capital. The reassignment was effectively a demotion, and officers who worked with him later said that Woo regarded it as a personal humiliation. After the transfer, Woo was given the nickname Mad Tiger because of his worsening behavior. After being transferred to the Gungyu Police Substation in December 1981, Woo, who had been living in a boarding house, began dating a woman named Jun, who lived next door, and the two began living together in her home on March 9th. However, Jun's family strongly opposed their relationship even before they started living together, and the reason was Woo's drinking habits. Whenever he drank, he would swear and become violent without regard for consequences, so her family could not help but oppose the relationship. Despite the objections, the two eventually moved in together. Jun's parents urged them to live together only after marriage, but Woo insisted on postponing the wedding until autumn, claiming that they did not have enough money for it, while also insisting on registering the marriage immediately. Woo, who already lived in poverty and carried a deep sense of inferiority, was believed to have developed an even stronger inferiority complex regarding his perceived incompetence after living with Jun before holding a proper wedding ceremony. Although they lived in the same house, the relationship was unstable. Witnesses recalled frequent arguments, mostly triggered by Woo's drinking. Rural communities were tightly knit. Residents knew a great deal about one another, and there was considerable gossip about their relationship, especially about the fact that they lived together without being married. Jun later said that Woo had an inferiority complex and was disturbed by the villagers' remarks about him living with his girlfriend. She also described him as somewhat eccentric. Woo grew increasingly irritated by the gossip, convinced that the villagers looked down on him. He often spoke about his time working in Seoul, expressing resentment over being reassigned and blaming others for the stagnation of his career. Officers who worked with him at the Gungyu substation described Woo as someone who felt abandoned, constantly defensive, and deeply resentful. Although he still completed his basic duties, he consistently displayed signs of instability, sudden mood shifts, complaints about respect, and a tendency to lose control when drinking. On April 26, 1982, Woo Bum-gon returned home around noon after his work shift. Jun tried to wake Woo by swatting a fly on his chest. Woo took this as an act of disrespect, and an argument broke out immediately. He smashed furniture, assaulted Jun, and left the house in anger. Jun ran to a neighbor's house for help. Later testimony showed that Woo remained agitated for a long time afterward, pacing between different places and continuing to drink. That moment, combined with alcohol, wounded pride, resentment over his demotion, and conflicts that had accumulated for months, became the breaking point. Just a few hours later, Woo entered the station's armory, took 2 M2 carbines, 2 handguns, at least 180 rounds of ammunition, and 7 grenades, then began moving through several villages. At around 9:30 p.m., Woo Bum-kon shot and killed his first victim, a 26-year-old man he happened to encounter. He then went to the local post office, killed 3 telephone switchboard employees, and cut the telephone lines to prevent survivors from contacting emergency services. The situation that day was confirmed through the testimony of Jeon Jon-taek, 84 years old, the brother of Jeon Jon-sak, a postal worker who died while on duty at the post office on the day of the incident. Mr. Jeon said, "I was sleeping when I heard crackling gunshots, so at first I thought it was a spy." He said, "I watched from my hiding place and saw Officer Woo entering house after house where the lights were on. He shot everyone, regardless of age. I heard screams from everywhere, but I was too scared to go outside." After that, he went to Torangni, where he threw grenades and shot at passersby in the market, killing 6 people. He also injured Jeon, who had gone out to check after hearing gunshots in the village. From that point on, he moved from village to village, taking advantage of his position as a police officer to enter homes and shoot their residents. At 10:30 p.m., Woo took an 18-year-old student, Kim Ju-dong, hostage and moved to Uiryeong, where he ordered Kim to buy him a soft drink from a grocery store owned by 52-year-old Shin Wei-do. After getting what he wanted, Woo killed Kim and then attacked the shop owner and his family. Shin escaped after being shot in the leg, but his wife and 2 daughters were killed. At that time, he walked through the market shouting, "There are spies! Come out and look!" to lure people outside. When gunshots were heard at the market gate, the people who had turned on their lights or stepped outside to see what was happening were shot by him, killing a total of 18 people in that village before he moved toward Pyeongchon-ni. He fired indiscriminately into any house with its lights on and threw grenades into crowded places and killed any villagers he encountered on the road. In Pyeongchon-ni, where a funeral rite was taking place, he claimed that an alert had been issued because North Korean spies had been detected. He offered condolence money and paid his respects. He drank with the mourners for about 10 minutes. Then, as his drinking habit resurfaced, he suddenly began cursing without any regard for the situation. A moment later, a man approached him, tapped his rifle, and said the bullets looked fake, which infuriated Woo Bum-kon. He ultimately killed 12 people inside the house and 8 more outside on the street, resulting in a total of 24 deaths in Pyeongchon-ni. Worse still, he found a crying baby and shot the child while saying, "Is there anyone not dead yet?" During this time, a taxi driver passing by saw flames and heard explosions. He stopped his car and ran from house to house, warning villagers to shut their doors and extinguish the flames. He shouted, "Put out the fire now! If you don't, we'll all die!" Thanks to his courage, several families were saved in the early moments. But Woo soon noticed the taxi driver and shot him dead shortly afterward. His body was found near the burning area, beside the houses he had tried to save. Although the police were alerted an hour after Woo began, they still took another hour to assemble a team of 37 officers before heading out to track down the shooter. 2 hours later, the police located Woo Bum-kon. He was hiding in the home of a farmer named Soo In-soo and had taken him and his family hostage. When the forces approached, Woo strapped 2 grenades to his chest and detonated them, killing himself and 3 hostages. Soo survived despite sustaining severe injuries. The shooting rampage ended after 8 hours, with 55 people dead, not including Woo, and 36 people injured who were taken to Jinju and Masan hospitals for treatment. Among them, a child who had been shot received emergency treatment almost immediately, but did not survive, dying on May 8th and raising the total death toll to 56. Because the area affected by the massacre was so large, 3 different hospitals received victims, leading to some individuals being counted twice and creating discrepancies among various news reports. Meanwhile, the police did not fire a single shot, nor did they save a single resident. The victims of the incident were of all ages: men, women, elderly people, and young children. 16 victims were under 20 years old, including 6 under 10 and a 1-month-old infant, causing widespread outrage. The fact that one individual caused 90 casualties was unprecedented worldwide, and the incident became a national embarrassment when it was recorded in the Guinness World Records as the deadliest mass murder carried out by a single person in such a short time. However, the case nearly disappeared from the news just 1 week after it happened. The reason was the suppression of media coverage under the Chunduan military regime. For more than 40 years, even within Uiryeong County, mentioning these victims was almost taboo. This explains the deep and lasting resentment their families have endured. Throughout the hours when Woo was firing across the villages, the reaction from the local police force was almost non-existent, and what they did, or failed to do, became a crucial reason why the massacre spread so quickly and claimed so many lives. At the Gunyu police substation where Woo worked, the 2 officers who carried the greatest responsibility, Chief Inspector Heo Chang-soon and Deputy Chief Inspector Kim Jin-woo, were not even present when the incident began. Instead of remaining on duty for the night shift, they left their posts without permission, went to a nearby hot spring with the village head, and drank alcohol. On their way back, they encountered a resident running toward them to report that people in the village had been killed, but they ignored the warning and continued straight to the station. Even after hearing a report that Woo had seized weapons and was firing at civilians, they did not return to help. They simply said they were lucky not to have been there and fled the station in fear. That attitude was not an isolated case. When another group of officers learned that Woo was attacking villagers, they ran to the armory, grabbed weapons, but instead of heading toward the direction of gunfire, they moved in the opposite direction. This was not strategy, it was panic. Residents later said they saw police officers running past the village, but none stopped to assist or assess the situation. Witnesses recalled that these officers only ran through and disappeared into the darkness, leaving the entire area to face Woo alone. Higher-ranking leadership did not fare any better. The chief of Uiryeong Police, Choi Jae-yoon, was in Busan that day without prior notice, claiming he was preparing for a meeting the next morning. When he received the report and returned to the county, it was already well past midnight. He reached the outskirts of the affected area but did not dare enter. From a distance, he saw bodies and injured residents scattered along the roads. Instead of gathering officers and organizing a search for the shooter, he panicked, fled back to the Gunyu substation, locked himself inside an office, and did nothing to activate the town's loudspeaker, sound the village siren, mobilize the civil defense forces, or request support from nearby stations. Even after fully understanding the severity of the situation, he merely reported it to the Ministry of Home Affairs and took no further action. Meanwhile, a team of about 30 officers from various departments had been dispatched after receiving information from a civil defense official living nearby. But when they reached the entrance of the village and heard gunfire and explosions, they decided to hide under a bridge out of fear of being shot in the dark countryside. When questioned why they did not enter the village to rescue civilians, they claimed they were setting up an ambush. That explanation immediately fueled public outrage, as no one could understand why an ambush was being conducted far from the scene of the massacre, and why armed officers abandoned residents while Woo continued to fire inside the village. All these events reflect a truth that could not be denied. For hours, no police force directly approached the area to stop Woo. They were either absent, fleeing, or too frightened to confront the attacker, and every minute that passed resulted in more lives lost. Looking back on the incident, many experts stated that Woo's brutality was only part of the story. What truly allowed the death toll to rise to such an unimaginable level were the systemic weaknesses surrounding him. An unguarded weapons storage room, a lack of commanding officers on duty, police abandoning their posts, the destruction of the communication lines within minutes, the absence of an emergency alert system, and villages too spread out to warn one another in the darkness. Woo did not need an elaborate plan. He acted within a space completely devoid of control, and it was that void which allowed a single police officer to move through 5 villages without resistance, leaving behind one of the deadliest massacres in modern Korean history. The massacre ended at dawn, but what happened afterward shocked the people of Uiryeong even more. The perpetrator was dead. There was no trial, no confession, and no legal authority stepped forward to explain the disastrous decisions made that night. Yet the strongest blow to public trust came from the response of the central government. Under the rule of Chun Doo-hwan, South Korea tightly controlled information. The massacre was immediately classified as a politically sensitive security incident, and news reports were withdrawn within days. Journalists were told to stop covering the story. Reporters were blocked from accessing the scene, and records related to the police response were sealed. For the government at that time, Uiryeong was not a place to be remembered. It was a name to be forgotten. The severity of the case led to the suspension of the provincial police chief and the arrest of 4 police officers for negligence and dereliction of duty. They were disciplined, but the punishments were widely viewed as far too lenient compared to the scale of the tragedy. People in Uiryeong believed these penalties were symbolic rather than true accountability. As public pressure mounted, a series of high-ranking officials, including the Minister of Home Affairs and the National Police Chief, submitted their resignations in an attempt to calm the outrage. A special task force was later formed to continue investigating the shooting and to handle the aftermath left behind by Woo. The President of South Korea also expressed condolences to the victims and ordered compensation for their families. But the impact of the massacre did not end with apologies or the resignation of a few officials. It exposed fatal weaknesses across the entire South Korean security system of the early 1980s. A 1983 report from the National Security Committee concluded military-grade weapons were stored like ordinary tools and control procedures were almost non-existent. After the Uiryeong incident, the government was forced to make reforms. Police armories nationwide were reorganized, adopting weapons management standards closer to those of the military. Recruitment policies for former soldiers entering the police force were also tightened. Candidates with histories of heavy drinking, behavioral disorders, or poor discipline were disqualified from the first screening. This was a direct response to the fact that Woo had a record of alcohol abuse, volatility, and psychological instability during his military service, yet was still accepted into the police force. At the same time, rules regarding night duty were strengthened. Behaviors such as leaving one's post to visit hot springs, as the Gungyu station officers had done, were explicitly banned, and penalties for abandoning duty during shifts were significantly increased. But perhaps the deepest impact lay within the Uiryeong community itself. For 40 years, the residents lived in silence. Many families who lost loved ones said they felt forgotten, not because Woo committed the crime, but because the government never acknowledged their suffering. Memorial services were discouraged, stories about the incident were labeled politically sensitive, and many people were forced to live with the feeling that their relatives had never existed. It was only after 2020, when many documents from the Chun Doo-hwan era were declassified, that the public began to understand the chaos and indifference of the security system during the night of the massacre. Only then did the anger that had been building for more than 4 decades finally surface. Families of the victims and local residents pushed the authorities to create an official memorial site. In 2024, the 4.26 Uiryeong Memorial Park was completed, a quiet space with stone tablets engraved with the names of all 56 victims. The park is not only a place of remembrance, but also a belated acknowledgement that this tragedy was not caused solely by a drunken police officer, but by a defensive system that collapsed at every level. Today, when residents stand before the stone memorial, most are not seeking punishment. That ended with Woo's death. What they want is recognition, that they were abandoned, that the system failed them, and that these lives could and should have been saved. The story of Woo Bum-gon is more than just a story of violence. It's also a reminder of what happens when the systems that are supposed to protect people collapse when they need it most. If you found this video useful, please like, share your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel. More real crime stories from Asia and around the world are coming, because the places we live in aren't always as safe as they seem. This is Dark Crimes Real. Thank you for watching, and stay safe.